Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss and internet shitlords, and I have at long last obtained my own copies of 101 Sarmatians. So today I'm going to show you what's in it. Now I know, like, this is a source book for the Baptism of Fire RPG, which is an OSR game for playing medieval authentic adventures in the early medieval period at the time of the Christianization of Poland in the 10th and 11th centuries. And I know I haven't done the whole, all of the videos I was going to do about the design notes of Baptism of Fire itself, but you can see some of those in the review playlist if you've been following it, or in my videos in general. And I'll continue to do those later on, but I figure that since this book is now out and has been for a while, I can get through this in one go. We may or may not have a visit from Domino. This is the first time I've done, since I got her, the first time I've done a review, and I'm doing it, on the living room table. So she could pop in, she might not. She was around here a moment ago. 101 Sarmatians, Noble Intrigues for Baptism of Fire by RPG Pundit. It is published by Mad Scribe Games, the same company that's done Baptism of Fire and Sword and Caravan and the various source books for Sword and Caravan. And this is the soft cover, and it also comes in hardcover, both of which are very nice. The production value, done entirely not by me, done by Mad Scribe, is really very good. It's got a lot of elements that were taken from marginalia of illustrated manuscripts. I don't know how many of you know about this, but in old medieval books would have fancy illustrations, right? They'd have fancy borders and some really impressive pieces of art. But they would also have some of these like funny little images in the kind of margins. Wherever there was like some extra space, they would have the habit of putting in these sorts of slightly funny images, and these are all over the book. Of course, you can also see that many of the heraldic shields of the different noble houses are present. The writing is quite clear, and in general, I mean, and I'm not giving myself any credit here because I had nothing to do with it, the production value of the book is quite high. That includes having repeated at the end regional maps which detail the locations of the various NPCs that you'll find in the book. And at the very back, you get a reproduction of the full map from Baptism of Fire. And so what 101 Sarmatians is about is essentially adding more info on the nobility in this period, in the period of Baptism of Fire, which can be used to run, like, if you want to run a campaign where all the characters are nobles or are connected to a noble house, that's obvious. If you want to just have these NPCs around in the different locations that might end up interacting with your party, that's also another use for it. And then there's a lot of other details about things to do with the society in general, and a couple of appendices that add some other material too. So it starts out with like a quick guide to the Polish nobility, how they were different from the nobility further west in Europe, like the French or the English, and the mythology of Polish aristocrats. The reason the book is called 101 Sarmatians is because the Polish aristocrats believed that they were descended from this warrior horseman tribe called the Sarmatians. And for the longest time, historians thought that was entirely a myth, that it was just something that was invented, and they thought it was invented relatively late. But recent historical and archaeological studies have determined that it was actually a relatively early development among the aristocracy, and that in fact there was some truth to it. And the details of that I put in this opening essay that actually shows you, in fact, they might have been in a certain way descended from the Sarmatians, because there was evidence in Poland that there were in fact a descendant group from the Sarmatians, who were known as the Alans, were in Poland and had apparently become integrated into the Slavic society. Then there's a lot of details on like what are the customs and the kind of the social rules of the nobility in Poland. Again, things that in some cases are similar, but in some cases are different from in Western Europe. And then a guide to running a noble campaign. And you have a table if you want to like do a campaign where your characters are all nobles to determine their starting Slacha class. The Slacha is the name for the nobility. And then I present all of the noble houses that are found in brief in the Baptism of Fire in the character creation section, where I expand the information about the house, and where I detail a certain number for each house of NPCs that are around at the time of the campaign. And obviously some of these are going to be like the heads of the houses, but then there are other people that have other interesting things. Now, in terms of historicity, I should point out that there's very little information, historical information about the people at the time of the Baptism of Fire campaign. So we know about some of the Piast house, obviously the royal house, and we know about a few people that were around who were members of these other aristocratic houses at the time. And of course I've included those, but a lot of the NPCs I've made here are instead kind of quasi-historical in that they are people who are inspired by actual members of these houses from later periods that I have put into a format that would fit with the time period, so that they're not anachronistic, but they're not actually people who were alive by name there, but that capture some of the eccentricities of the people who have been members of these noble houses, most of which are still around today. And they're presented in alphabetical order, and some of these, well, all of them get biographies, but some of them get biographies and stats, particularly the ones that I felt would possibly need stats, and you get all the, the various information about the house at the top. So, the House of Deliwa was based in Masovia. Its symbol is 3 red roses. The members of the house are said to have an excessive tendency towards drink and bribery. Now, I didn't make that up. This is from the earliest Polish armorial, which is to say the earliest Polish guide to the families of these noble houses. That was written by someone who is clearly a very cheeky guy, and he had these kind of notes about these house, like the what these houses were known for, right? And sometimes they're positive and often not so much, And then a lot of these houses have a particular origin story, so I included that as well. So here it said the family had descent from the pagan tribe of the Livonians, who occupy modern-day Latvia. They got their power in the region by defeating repeated incursions of Yotvingian barbarians who they despised. And then I mentioned where they are found at the time of the setting. And then I give like individual stories for these nobles. So you can, if you're in a region where members of this house are, you can have the characters potentially encounter some of these people and get involved in whatever it is their issues are, which they have many. Not these specifically, I mean in general, And there's House Geralt, which is probably where Geralt of Rivia's name comes from in the Witcher stories. And so obviously it's a bit of a pun because I made 101 NPCs, and so it's 101 Sarmatians. But I couldn't resist. And this gives you a ton of NPCs that you can work with, right? I mean, you can all obviously modify to your taste also. Hey, guess who's here? It's Domino. And yeah, they have fantastic lore, basically, that isn't lore that I just made up. It's lore that's real from, history. And historical lore, that's the thing, like people can make interesting fiction, but in my experience, history makes stuff that is often wilder because it's sometimes less sensible or less consistent than somebody making up a story, right? So the stories of these families are pretty remarkable. So after we get through the 101 Sarmatians, there are other important resources here. So you've got details on the officers of a noble house, like who, besides the just a family and their rank, you can have officers that work for the house, some of which will be members of the family, and some of which will be non-members, but are just vassals of the family that are in positions of authority. Which means you can also run a kind of mixed game where not every character necessarily is a noble, but could be associated to the noble house through work. Then I talk about what were the popular activities that the nobility engaged in, and the sort of stuff, why these things mattered to them. And then I have a table of potential broad-based noble events that can make adventure queues. I also have details on noble cults, because of course nobles had a tendency, at least as much as anyone else, for engaging in, troubling heretical activity. And then I have noble cult event seeds, so some more potential adventures there. And then we get to the Appendix 2, which is the devotion to saints. And, as you know, obviously, this is an important part of Baptism of Fire, because it's about, the Piast house were the first Christian kings of Poland, and they, during the early period of their dynasty, they were embroiled in a tremendous campaign to Christianize the country, which met with enormous amounts of resistance, right? One of the things that happened in that area of Europe, not just in Poland, but also in Germany and in other areas around Central Europe, was that you had powerful pagan tribes and powerful pagan priesthoods that generated revolt and rebellion against the converted Christian rulers, and there was a lot of that sort of thing. And of course, in this being a time before the Reformation, the saints were very important. And so here are a set of guidelines of what happens when you're devoted to a saint, if you pray to a saint, and what kind of benefits those can give you. I talk about saintly relics, secondary and primary relics. A secondary relic is an object that a saint had, whereas a primary relic is a piece of the saint, like a bone or something. And then I list the saints that were popular in Poland at the time and what their patronage was, because each saint had a sort of a different patronage. So Cosmas and Damian were the patron saints of medicine, right? Dorothea of Caesarea was the patron saint of flowers. Elizabetha was the patron saint of pregnant women. Eustachius was the patron of hunters. And so, depending on your characters, you might have different favored saints that, obviously if you're an archer class, you might be praying to Saint Sebastian, and then, sorry, that was Appendix 1. In Appendix 2, I present a couple of NPC classes, which first they appeared in the Pundit Presents, but then also in the Old School Companion 1. But I included them here for completeness sake, and slightly modified, the courtier class and the priest class, which is to say the courtier is someone who's a professional bureaucrat and administrator of a noble or royal court. And the priest is not, in Baptism of Fire, you have the holy man, which is basically a saint, or the holy warrior, which is basically a kind of paladin of God. The priest class is a class of someone who is part of the institutional priesthood, but is not gifted with the powers of the Holy Spirit in the same sense as a holy man would be. So it's it's a professional priest, but not one that goes around doing miracles. So both of these are meant to be mainly NPC classes, but there's certainly in some campaigns you could choose to play these as player character classes. They're not as action ready as some of the other classes, but in a game, say, that's focused on intrigue, that can be useful. And then Appendix 3, I go region by region of Poland, and all of those NPCs that I listed back there, I place where you can find them, right? So if you're looking, if your characters are around Greater Poland, and you want to see, well, who's in Gniezno, right? Then you're going to know all the different guys that are mentioned in their respective sections. You can find those guys usually in Gniezno, right? That allows you to not have to go trying to look up and find, oh, who is this guy whom I think was here or something. If you're running the game, which I hope you are, you're running it as a sandbox. You can quickly see and then quickly reference which aristocrats are where, and that's I think makes it a lot more practical than if you just had to go paging through or making notes of where you're going to find people, right? So that is basically the content of Baptism of Fire. It has it's technically 100 pages if you count the last page. So as you can see, like this is basically, I guess I could say that you could use it in other games if you're making your own game world and you want to have a whole bunch of aristocrats. I mean, if your game world is essentially medieval, they'll probably fit pretty well. At least a lot of them would. But I mean, more so than a lot of my products, this one is pretty setting specific to Baptism of Fire. So if you've picked up Baptism of Fire, and I really hope you have, a lot of people have. It was my fastest gold ranked bestseller of all time, and it was number one on the OSR charts for like 2 months in when it came out in last year. If you haven't, you definitely should pick up Baptism of Fire, and then depending on the type of campaign you want to run, 101 Sarmatians is a very good source book to get for it. So yeah, I hope you'll check it out, and I think you'll find it very worthwhile for your Baptism of Fire campaign. And as far as anything else, well, you can check out all my other products as well. The links to them are in the description of this video, like all my other videos. I do have a bit of other news, which is that the medieval authentic, the old school companion, that's what I mean. The old school medieval authentic companion, number 3, will be coming out fairly shortly. I've seen the final version of it. It's got to go through approval by drive-through. Who knows whether that'll take a short or a long time. The last time, 101 Sarmatians got like approved in 48 hours. I was blown away because normally, at least any products of my authorship that have been submitted to drive-through usually took longer than that. So maybe they've streamlined their process a bit more, and it might be that the Old School Companion 3 will come out really quickly, and it's going to have a ton of great stuff in it too. That is, from the Pundit Presents stuff. It's going to have basically all the remaining medieval authentic stuff from Pundit Presents that weren't in number 1 or number 2. So you can feel free to check that out. One last detail, which is regarding both 101 Sarmatians and Baptism of Fire and all of my other products. Drive-Thru RPG has made it known to publishers, and like all my publishers at once warned me about it, that they're going to have to raise prices because of increased printing costs in America and Europe. And so if you've kind of been in mind to buy these products or any of my other products, you might want to do that before those changes go into effect. And I'm not sure exactly when they will, but it's going to be pretty soon, so be forewarned. Like if you know it's a game that you want to buy it now, because otherwise it's going to be significantly more expensive in a little while. And some of my publishers are going to, get ahead of the game and increase the price to adjust to the new printing costs earlier and some might wait until shortly after they do it, but either way it's going to happen, right? So I guess that's a general warning for anyone who's thinking of picking up a book but hasn't yet. So I guess that's everything for today. I will continue doing more of the design notes of Baptism of Fire proper over time, and I've got a bunch of other OSR products that have come in now for me to review, so I will be doing more of these reviews. But keep in mind, my reviews usually get considerably less views than any of my other categories. They get less than the rants against WotC, obviously. They get less than the DMing advice, and they get less than the live streams. So this is like, these are the videos that, you know, I think if you like these kind of videos that review a product, often not my own, of course. In this case, I'm not reviewing, but I'm showing the material of my own book. But in any case, they tend to get less views, and so if you like the reviews, then I would strongly urge you to share the video so that it gets a decent amount of viewership and keeps me motivated to do these more often. All right, that's everything for today. Currently smoking. This is a Near Up Poker with Argento Roots.